Welcome back to Mind Your Head. This week's guest is the one and only me. I sit down with Sophie Wilson from Big Brand Energy podcast, and we speak about my own personal journey and what led to creating Mind Your Head podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to Big Brand Energy. Today I have on an honourable guest, a client of mine. His name is Elliott Hagen. You may have seen him on Instagram going under the name of Mind Your Head. Elliott, welcome to Big Brand Energy.
Thank you very much for having me. Very excited to be on.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good episode, I think, given that, you know, you've had me on your podcast and now it's just returning the favour, just keeping it even.
Yeah, loving it.
So you've gone and done the unthinkable. You've actually gone and started a podcast.
Yeah.
Can you just start by telling everyone about what your podcast is about, what led you to beginning the whole journey?
The podcast is about encouraging people to be vulnerable with each other, essentially, to open up with each other and to be honest with yourself. If you've got any doubts, anything you're struggling with, I'm trying to create a space where people can open up to each other and seek help if you need it. What led me down this road was I work away in the mines. I operate machinery for 12 hours a day. And when I first started the job, I was listening to a lot of music and I realized I could spend a bit more time through self-development, listening to podcasts and that sort of thing. And I listened to a podcast that featured an ex-NRL player, and I won't say his name because I'm trying to get him on my podcast, so I want to keep that as a surprise. But his podcast, he spoke about his time playing professional rugby and his battles he had with anxiety and depression and how that led to alcohol and drug abuse. And for the first time in my life, he put into words exactly how I felt during my 20s. And before that, I couldn't put into words myself. I couldn't explain it to someone how I felt, what I went through. I just couldn't articulate it. And for the very first time, I heard it put into words exactly how it felt for me. And from that moment, I realized, like, holy shit, maybe I'm not alone in this. Maybe there's other people that have been through similar things. And what also led to the podcast was I thought, I don't want to be mining for my whole life. It's a pretty tough gig. And I'm trying to think, what am I passionate about? I love chatting to people. My mates would always poke fun at me that I'll chat to a stranger and I'll be there for an hour and a half and now I know them, like best friends with them. So I love chatting to people, and I've been through some stuff myself. I've always wanted to be creative, and I thought a podcast would be a great thing to do. I've got some friends who have been through some pretty heavy stuff. I've got some family members who have been through some pretty heavy stuff, and I think what a good opportunity would be for us to share our experiences and hopefully help someone like that player did for me. And then it's just sort of taken off and snowballed.
It certainly has. It's pretty incredible. Since you've started, you've had a few questions. I know you've told me about people coming up to you saying, what's your story, Elliott? Like, you're having these great conversations, and you do a very good job at storytelling throughout your interviews. But part of the reason I wanted to get you on this podcast was to actually give you an opportunity to talk about your own mental health journey, because I think it's an important story. I know you've opened up to me about it, and I think it in itself could help a lot of people. So would you care to share your darkest day?
Yeah, I would love to. It's a bit of a long story.
We love those.
To tell the story properly, I think I would have to go back and talk about my dad's upbringing. I think we won't go too much deep into it, but he had a really, really tough upbringing. And his defense mechanism was if he showed emotion, he would get sort of preyed upon. He would get abused. So his defense mechanism was not showing any emotion. So as he grew up, not showing any emotion was a sign of strength. So I love my dad. We had such a good childhood, but if I had anything going on mentally, Dad would just sort of tell me to get on with it. It wasn't a sort of a space where I could just tell him my worries, my doubts. And that continued on all through my childhood. I think it's also a generational thing. And that just continued on, and I think I didn't voice any of my concerns or anxieties, even throughout school. I was a very anxious kid, socially as well. And I vividly remember when I really noticed it was I did a gap year in the army. I got out, and then eight of my good mates, we all went to Canada together. Mm-hmm. And it was such a good trip. I think we were there for 4 or 5 weeks. We were snowboarding and traveling around Canada. And we're all drinking at the cabin one night. And all of a sudden, it was such a good night. And all of a sudden, I got this overwhelming feeling of like darkness and sadness. And I remember just sitting at the table, kind of like this. Everyone was chatting, and I just felt like everything just closed in on me. I ignored everything else, and I just felt so much sadness. And I was just thinking, why am I so sad right now? Like, I'm in Canada with all my best mates, having the best time. And it lasted for about 5 minutes. And as quick as it came, as quick as it was gone. And I remember just getting out of it, just going, what the hell was that feeling? And it didn't happen at all, like, through the rest of the trip. And I remember coming back, and Dad said, how was your trip? And I said, it was great, but something happened. And he was like, what happened? And I was like, I felt really sad. He goes, for how long? I go, for about 5 minutes. I just felt really, really sad, like there's a cloud over me. And he's had some mental health issues with his side of the family, suicide, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. So I think he sort of got a bit worried. And that continued on, that anxiety, that feeling of deep sadness continued on when I was playing footy, to the point where, again, I didn't know how to express it. I couldn't put it into words. I didn't feel like going to my parents, I could open up to them. As I got older, I thought I could just push it down. I thought I could just forget about it. Or at the same time, I thought, maybe next year it will be gone. Maybe I can just grow out of it. Maybe it's just a teenage thing. Maybe when I get to my 20s, grow a little bit older, hopefully it will go. And I played that game for 5 years. I just was like, maybe next year will be gone. Next year will be gone. And every year that went on, it just got worse and worse and worse. And it got to a point where I started experimenting with drugs. And for the very, very first time when I started using drugs, it was like such a euphoric feeling, because when people take drugs, it might hype them up and go party and whatnot. But for me, it calmed me down. It silenced all the noise in my head, and it was such a relief. It was one of the best feelings at that time that I could have, was being on a high and just having nothing going on in my head. And the other feeling that made me feel like that was playing rugby. So for 80 minutes on a Saturday, nothing else mattered. There was no other thoughts going on, no anxieties, no other worries about the future or the past. When I was playing a game, nothing else mattered. And as soon as that whistle blew that the game was over, all these feelings and emotions would just come rushing back in again. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I felt like I was addicted to that feeling. I don't know if I was addicted to rugby, but I was addicted to that feeling that it was like a release. What spiraled out of control was that I needed that feeling more and more. So I couldn't wait till Saturday. So once I started experimenting with drugs and thinking, whoa, I can have this any day of the week. But at the same time, I knew it was bad for me. So it was like I was going around in circles, getting worse and worse and worse, taking more drugs, wanting that high to be more. And as I was taking more drugs, rugby was going down the hole. Like, my priorities shifted, whereas I wanted to play professional rugby. I was putting all my effort into that. But then during the week, I was taking drugs just to silence all that noise in my head, thinking that was the only answer. That went on for about 4 or 5 years. Didn't talk to anyone about it. Just thought, like, when you're a kid, when you're young, you just think that this time in your life is going to last forever. And then you forget that you're getting older. Before you know it, there's 5 years gone, and you haven't done any real hard work around your mental health. You've just like put a Band-Aid over it. Just done drugs, played footy, done drugs, played footy. One season I got injured, wasn't playing good footy. I was down on myself, stuck in that party mode of just taking drugs. And I remember I was in a relationship at the time, and this is me thinking that the relationship's the issue. I'm feeling this because of the relationship. So I was in a 5-year relationship, broke up with her, couldn't tell her a reason, couldn't tell her why I was doing it. I just felt like that was the solution to the problem. She moved overseas. Then I was stuck by myself, and the feeling was still there. And I was like, fuck, well, that wasn't the problem. I've just ended a relationship for no reason. Then I got more down on myself. And then I remember going out, had a large amount of drugs, and came back to my apartment and then didn't want the day to end. I didn't want to wake up and then feel all these feelings again. I just wanted this high to keep going and going. And I remember looking at my hand, I had a handful of drugs, and I was like, yeah, I've had too much, but like, I don't want it to end. So fuck it. Like, if I die, I die. And I remember taking and thinking, oh, well, like, whatever, like, if I live, we'll find out tomorrow or whatever. I was just really carefree and just didn't disregard for my own health. That was Friday night, and then I woke up I thought it was Saturday, but I actually woke up on Sunday. I pissed myself. There was vomit on the ground. And me being in so much denial, I just had a shower, had a feed, went to work on Monday, and just didn't acknowledge it, didn't sink in. I just was in so much denial that was some sort of attempt. And then later in the year, I decided, silly enough, like, I was just still in that same headspace, like nothing changed really. I just put it to the side, like ignored it. And later in that year, I went down to Sydney for New Year's. It was like a 3-day bender. You know, things I shouldn't be doing. Surrounded by people that I probably shouldn't be surrounded by. At that time, like, probably just not the best people for that headspace that I was in. Not bad people, but just I shouldn't have been in that situation. And then I remember getting back from down in Sydney, and it was like 3 days without sleep. And then I got back, and on the 4th day, I tried to sleep, and I couldn't sleep. My body was just shocking me awake. I was like, that's weird. So I got 4 days, like no sleep, like just feeling so run down. And then on the fifth night, I tried to go to sleep, and I had the same thing. My body was just shocking me awake. Like, I think my whole nervous system was just fried. And then I thought, no, I've got to check myself in the hospital. Like, I've got to go to emergency. Like, I don't know why my body's not letting me sleep. And went to the nurses at the hospital there and told them what happened. I was down in Sydney. I was at a big bender. Even then, I was trying to play it down to them. I was almost lying to them, saying, what happened? Oh, I've just had a big night. Like, it's all right. Like, trying to convince them. And I remember they did some blood tests, and my piss was like black almost. Like, I was so dehydrated. And I remember they were hooking me up to a drip, and they had a carton of water next to me in the hospital bed, and they were you can't leave until all this water's gone. Like, you're just so dehydrated. I remember calling my parents, because at that time I was so broke in terms, like, I was spending all my money on drugs. And I remember I think my mum paid for that admission to the hospital. And then she was like, well, what's up? And I think they knew all those years. I think they knew something was up, but we just never said those words to each other. And mum and dad were on the phone, and they said, what's up? I go, I went down to Sydney, just had a big week. Everything's fine. Like, don't worry. Looking back on it now, like, I could tell the tone of their voice. Like, they were so worried about me. I remember them saying, like, just please, like, we love you. Let's look after yourself. And I was like, yep. And I hung up the phone, and I remember just laying in the hospital bed, and it just really hit me, like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Like, mum and dad sacrificed so much for me and my 2 brothers. Come over from New Zealand, put in so much hard work. They dedicated their whole life pretty much to be raising their children, working so many hours, working so many different jobs, just to put food on the table and send us to a good school and raise good boys. And then how am I repaying them? I'm just throwing it all away for no good reason. And I remember laying in the hospital bed, and it was like a flick of the switch. It was some people need to go to rehab or need to go to counsellors. I remember just laying in the hospital bed, and it was like someone just flicked a switch at the back of my head, and everything else changed. My whole mindset was like, nah, I need to change. I need to stop what I'm doing. I can't keep going down this road because, like, it's going to get worse than this, and I don't want to get worse than this. I think that was a pretty close to rock bottom for me. I think that really scared me. I think I scared a lot of my friends, and I scared a lot of my family, and I think they all knew that I was going down a road that one point I probably wouldn't be able to come back from. And then I moved from Brisbane back to the sunny coast, stopped doing drugs, stopped doing alcohol, went and saw a psychologist for the first time. I think that was my biggest fear I think what stopped me was fear. I was so scared of seeking help. I was so scared of unlocking all those suppressed emotions and opening that can of worms. And I was just so afraid. Like, I was very immature. I wasn't very emotionally intelligent. I was a child. Even at 27, 28, I was still, looking back on it now, I was such a little boy. I didn't show much courage. I didn't want to do the hard work. I didn't want to put all that effort into try to fixing myself. I would rather just procrastinate and thinking like I would just get by procrastinating. But with your mental health, with anything really, like especially your mental health, you can procrastinate as much as you like, but at some point it's going to catch up to you. And it caught up to me when I was 28, 29. Finally went and saw a psychologist. I bit the bullet and went and saw a psychologist thinking it would be the most terrifying thing in the world. And it was just like this. And it was beautiful.
You love chatting.
Love chatting. And I remember doing 3 sessions with a wonderful woman and thinking that she was going to do all these weird little like tips and methods and all this sort of strange shit. And all she did was listen to me. Did 3 sessions and she goes, "What's up?" And I would sort of start speaking, and then when there would be a break, she goes, "What else?" And then I would think, and I go, "What else?" And then I would keep talking, and then it would be an hour go by, and then she was like, "How do you feel?" I go, "Much better." And I go, "Cool, I'll see you next week." And we did 3 sessions of that, and all I did was just talk. I just talked for 3 sessions, let everything out. She gave me some breathing exercises and some little tips and how to manage it. And then I think that was the beginning. I think I just needed to release everything. Everything was just bottled up. She said some things like, me being so immature, I thought I'm the only one going through this. And what she told me was, you're not the first person to go through this, and you won't be the last person to go through this. And she's like, I'm seeing people right now that have been in your position and are so much better. So there's hope. Do not think that this is incurable, or don't think that you can't get better. It's just little habits in your routine that you've just got to change. And one was surrounding myself with the right people. Nutrition was a big one. Sleep was a big one. Something that I really valued was financial support. So when I have got a job and I'm earning money, that really affects my mental health. So when I was spending all my money on drugs and I couldn't buy food, that was just spiraling me out of control. Security is
like a basic human need.
Yeah. So. And then that was the very beginning of sort of the journey. And then it's since then I've been peeling back layers every year of trying to figure out my reactivity and how I my patience levels, and I'm getting to know myself. As soon as you start it, I'm starting to know myself deeper and deeper and deeper every year. And I think it's a combination of me maturing. I think when I got to 30, I became really self-aware of my tics, who I am as a person. I think when I was 20 to 30, I just ignored it or wasn't aware of it or too immature to really realize who I am as a person, my personality traits, what angers me. I think in your 20s, you don't really think about why that makes you angry. I think you just think about the anger itself. But when I don't know why, I turned 30 and I just was really like, when I got angry, I was like, what does make me angry? What is it? Yeah, and I just went through a whole journey of, I really wanted to better myself, and I think I had a responsibility to my mum and dad, to my friends, to my girlfriend, that I want to be a better person. And I really need to take accountability for the choices that I make and the decisions that I make. And I started down this journey of, look, I want to be the best version that I can be. And I don't want to make any excuses. I don't want to half-ass it. Let's get to the bottom of some of my things. And recently that's led me down. I've had a few concussions playing rugby, a few more than I should have, some pretty bad ones. So I recently went down to the Macquarie University in Sydney to do some tests, some brain tests, to make sure I haven't got to CTE or the early stages of CTE. I don't know. I can't remember what CTE stands for.
We won't quiz you.
It's a long word, but it's pretty much just repetitive brain injury.
Right.
So trauma to the head. There's a lot of rugby players, a lot of contact sport players, NFL players that have been diagnosed with it. And a lot of the symptoms are mood swings, depression thoughts or anxiety, a lot of anger, reactivity. And they sort of like ticked a lot of boxes that I was feeling. So I was really, really worried that the effects of concussions have had a huge impact on me. And then also I went and saw a psychiatrist to dive deeper into some of my mood swings and mood levels, and we're still doing appointments at the moment now because I was fearing that I had bipolar or a mood disorder. And we're still doing more tests at the moment now, but I think what we've sort of come to conclusion is that there is a spectrum, I guess, of that. And at the moment, he thinks I'm down the low end of the spectrum. I thought I was pretty bad, but he gave me some reassurance to know that you're not as bad as you think you are. Your highs are normal, but your lows are a little bit lower than everyone else's. So it's given me some answers because I knew some of the feelings aren't normal.
The depth of them
just aren't normal. And it scared me. And before I would just ignore them. And I said, nah, I'm not ignoring all this shit anymore. Like, I'm not being a child. I'm going to show a bit of bravery and courage, and I'm going to go seek answers for some of these things that are worrying me because I want to be better. Like, I want to have kids someday. I want to be a dad, and I want to be the best dad. And I don't want to carry these wounds over to my kids. So I want to put in the effort now rather than potentially carry something over to my kids. So I want to put all the effort in now. And yeah, it's been an eye-opening journey so far. And like I think we talked about earlier, like I wish I did this earlier in my 20s, but I don't think I was at a space where I could do it. So I think all the timings happened for a reason. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. It does. When you were talking about your parents sort of viewing you and sort of knowing something's up prior to when you were lying on the hospital bed, do you feel like you were aware of how bad things were, or were you in full denial?
I was in full denial until I got off the phone to my parents.
Right.
I think the phone call to my parents, I could hear their tone in their voice. And I remember like looking around the hospital and they had the drip in me and stuff. And I remember just laying there previously thinking who cares? Like, who cares I'm in hospital? And then I got off the phone with my parents and I'm like, what do you mean who cares? Like, one phone call, everything just changed. So I remember like my whole headspace changed. Like,
it's interesting because, you know, we've spoken off air about this concept of rock bottom, and I've asked you the question of do you think it's necessary for people to meet their rock bottom in order to change? And I will put that question to you in a second, but so everyone can hear your answer. But what I found when I was listening to you just then is that, you know, you mentioned rehab, counselling, all these different mechanisms to deal with mental health. And then you were speaking about what actually did shift it for you. And it dawned on me that no matter which way you kind of go down, whichever avenue you're going down in terms of the mechanism you use to help yourself with your mental health or mental illness, whichever way you want to put it, it's essentially a perspective shift is the cure, right? And however you access that perspective shift, credit to you, that's your way. But I think, you know, when you were lying there, it was the tone in your parents' voice that allowed you to completely shift from current Elliott's perspective of like, it's all about me and it doesn't matter if I'm here or not, doesn't matter if I'm partying hard, to be like, oh, actually, it's not all about me. There's actually a lot of other people at play. And, you know, when you speak about the fact you want to be a dad someday, you're also talking about, you know, you want to actually level up for the sake of, in that perspective, you know, having a kid, you want to be this person for them, which I just think is so powerful, because it's essentially what you're doing right now with your podcast is you're providing perspective, which is what will change people, which is what will help them on their journey or contribute to it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's what I've found with that was that I was playing the victim.
Yeah.
It was all about me. I'm a victim. Nothing else matters. Poor Elliott. It's definitely, you do the change for yourself, absolutely. But when you've got something that's greater than yourself in terms of like I don't want my parents to bury their son.
Yeah.
You know, that's a huge motivator for me, was imagine the pain on my parents that if I kept going down this road, they were going to bury me. And I would never want to be a parent and have to go through that with one of my kids.
Absolutely.
So it's finding that perspective and that motivation that's greater than yourself.
So now the question of rock bottom. You've obviously interviewed a lot of people now with your podcast. A lot of people hit their version of rock bottom. What's your perspective on it? Do you think it's necessary to hit, or can you change before it?
I would love to think that we can change before it, because that is one of the aspects of the podcast that I'm trying to create, is people being proactive about their mental health. I don't want people to get to rock bottom for them to change. I know that a lot of my guests have been to rock bottom, but that's 50-50. Like, sometimes you get to rock bottom and you don't have the opportunity to change because you're not lucky enough. Sometimes it gets the better of you. And sometimes you go to rock bottom and then you can just sort of get yourself out of it. But I don't want people to have to go to rock bottom. So if they're listening to the Mind Your Head podcast and they can resonate with a story with one of the guests, and they can almost see themselves in the future and go, fuck, this is what could happen to me. I hope that initiates change before it goes to rock bottom. So, yeah, they definitely can. You can definitely turn around before you get to rock bottom. But I think human nature...
You'll test it.
You test it.
You'll push it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting. So with your journey, like as in you obviously have a full-time job, your podcast isn't your full-time pursuit. What's your thoughts on this idea of purpose, and how do you see your career playing a role in this purpose, if you believe it to be necessary to have one?
That's a good question. Because
I am the master.
Because mine are not aligned at all.
Well, I've noticed that.
At all.
Well, firstly, do you believe that everyone has a purpose on this planet?
Yes.
What's your purpose?
So my purpose now is doing this podcast and hopefully creating change in people's lives. That's what I feel like I can offer so much value in that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm passionate about. And I feel like if I can align my passions in helping people, that's my purpose.
Yeah.
And that's for the very first time that I've thought about having a purpose ever.
Interesting. Because I know that a lot of the people that are in my world, they have this kind of almost an existential crisis about, should I start a podcast? Should I leave my job? And it's this big deal. And so that's why I want you to give your perspective on, like, can they overlap? Can they coexist? Do you need to be the extremist who is now a podcaster, or can you still have your other life? Like,
yeah. What
would you say to the person that's like in their head about, shit, I need to like do this whole thing. I've got this purpose and I need to do it.
It's hard to give advice on because people's situations are so different. For me working out the mines allows me to have financial freedom in some way. The interest rates keep going up. Financial freedom, but time freedom. So I love that. Well, I'm back here for the week. I can dive into the podcast so much, and I feel like I'm adding so much value while I'm back. And then when I go away to work, it's me providing for my family too. One day, I would absolutely love if I could just do the podcast full time. That would be amazing. I feel like definitely you can go all in. You can also have a passion and then have a job, I think, or a purpose. I think it doesn't have to be related all the time.
I agree.
I think people have this idea that it has to be this, or it has to be that, or it has to be this. I think it's whatever works for you, whatever you're happy with. I don't like leaving the sunny coast and going away for the work for the week, but I know that I'm providing. And as a man, I've realized one of the things that I hold value to is being useful, being purposeful, and providing. I love that I get to provide for my partner and my little dog. I love that. I take pride in that. And I also, that's one side of me. That's one side Elliott. And then the other side of Elliott is connecting with people and doing the podcast and finding this purpose and having this passion. So I don't think I answered the question fully, but I think there's more than one way to go about it. I think you can definitely have your podcast on the side and also have a full-time job. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is you have to have an assessment of your life, take inventory of what everything's giving you, and keep the things that give more than they take. Your job obviously gives you the financial freedom, security, all these things, and your podcast gives you the other things, which is awesome. But I think actually you answered it perfectly, and I think a lot of people would get a lot from that answer, because it can be pretty intense when you're trying to start a podcast to be like, what should I do? How do I go about this? Which I'd actually like you to talk about in terms of the challenges that come with a podcast. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the true challenge that comes with a podcast. So I want you to open up about, maybe, has your journey with your podcast, has it been similar to anything you've ever faced before?
Nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah, nothing. Because it's something that I'm so passionate about, and when you do it in front of other people, because I don't know if I've got this competitive side of me, or when I play sport, I just want to be the best at it.
Yeah.
And I take it very seriously, and the things that I talk about in the podcast is sometimes lighthearted, but a lot of the time it's very serious emotional trauma. Mm-hmm. So I take it very seriously, and a lot of the guests that come on it's their first time talking about these sorts of things. I do a lot of prep. To understand each topic that we're talking about, because I want to be as present as I can be. I don't like just to go in there and wing it, and I like to take it very seriously, as I think I should. What I've found is even my communication skills, I think I needed to improve.
Really? In what sense?
One thing that I do on the outside of a podcast, is when I'm chatting to someone, I often interrupt them when a thought comes in. So we'll be chatting, and then you have said something that sparks the thought in my head, and before I let you finish, I've jumped in.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you listened to the first couple episodes.
I have. I didn't notice that, but it's interesting.
I've sort of cut them off, and I've listened back to some of the episodes, and I think I've just got to be a little bit more present and just be a person just to hear, rather than trying to always react to what they've said. Something you mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about my podcast, that you said that this is your art, and I thought about that for the rest of the day, because I never really thought about this as art until you said it. And it is. I never thought I was a creative person at all. I always looked up to creative people. I really was like, if you're a musician, if you're a painter, if you did art, like art design or anything like that, I was like, fuck you. Like, I'm so jealous that you can just put yourself out there for everyone to see. And I was really envious of those sorts of people. And the more I thought about what I do and what I like, I was like, Sophie's right. This is art. Like,
some people are painters, some people are like, potters and all the things, but you're a conversationalist.
Yeah.
And there is so much that comes from it. And I mean, like, all art is really vulnerable. So even if you're not having, a conversation like in your podcast, to the person who has a podcast that's listening, even if it's not heavy as such, as like trauma, mental health, if it's true, if it's your truth, it's very vulnerable. And I see you as an artist. I definitely see you as an artist. Like, not every, painter, I feel, is doing it for the art of painting. Some people are doing it for the outcome, but you're doing it to express and to impact on that journey, as opposed to whatever things at the end of the race.
Yes, and that's something that I've definitely changed in my life, is not focusing on the outcome so much or the achievement. I'm so wholeheartedly concentrated on when I've got a guest coming in, I just want to make that the best episode, or tell the story as best as I can, regardless of who's watching. Like, I was so naive, or I was just so oblivious that I didn't think people were going to connect with the episodes. I remember like having a chat with you and thinking, like, worst case scenario, like me and my mate have just had a really deep conversation.
Yeah.
Or me and my dad have had a really deep conversation, and I was like, I remember when I first started, I walked out of the episodes going, oh, I wonder if anyone's going to like connect with that. And that's just me not like realizing maybe the depth or how impactful the conversations that we're having. I love that about me. I love that I'm not doing this for attention. I'm not doing this for people to watch. I love that people watch. I love that people tune in. But that's not my purpose. My purpose is trying to create change. My purpose is trying to help people be vulnerable with each other. And I think the outcome, if you focus on that, the outcome will sort of take care of itself. And
it is. And it's doing so well. So it's just so incredible. I want to talk about those fears that you had before you started, before you saw the crowds flooding your DMs being like, this episode changed my life, Elliott, thank you. Prior to that, feedback, which you were so worthy of, what was coming up for you? What stories were playing out? Like, what were your worst fears of starting this and then XYZ happening?
My biggest fears were people thinking this was a stupid idea. I think I gave people too much space in my life with their thoughts or emotions. I think I gave them too much control over mine. I think I cared too much about what people thought. I think I didn't do a lot of things in my life because of the thought of people thinking that it was a stupid idea. I was so nervous to start this podcast thinking that people were just going to laugh and say, that's the dumbest, stupidest thing ever. And I couldn't be more wrong. But also as I've gotten older, I've realized like I can't live with myself only making decisions that people agree with or people think are good, because they're not me. If one of the big things I talked to my parents about was, if I'm going to do something and if I'm going to make mistakes, I want them to be my mistakes. I don't want them to be someone else's mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think my parents maybe, I think I gave my parents a hard time when I was a kid because they would give me a lot of advice, and I'm probably not a good person to give advice to because I always want to find out things on my own.
Yeah.
And I think I took advice off a lot of people and just did things in my life that they would do in their life, and it served me no purpose. So I remember just bit the bullet, and I was just like, you know what? I don't care if people think this is a silly idea or they're going to laugh at me and go, why are you talking about that sort of stuff? I'm going to push that to the side and go, wait, what am I passionate about? I've realized time goes so quick, and I want to do things that make me happy and things that I'm passionate about. And I remember going into this being so nervous about like the reaction of people and thinking like, I was sort of like tensed a little bit going, fuck, I wonder if people are what are they going to say? And I was like, who cares what people think? And the reactions of people have been amazing. And I'm like, oh man, maybe I should just do what makes me happy all the time now.
Yeah. Maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow, I feel that. I remember you coming in for the first time and like saying your idea, and I was like, I love it. And you were like, really? I'm like, yeah, don't you? And you're like, yeah, I do. And
I didn't think you were going to say that.
Yeah. So good. And in terms of like the outcome of it all, what's been your favourite part? Like you're probably 6 months. Oh, have you been recording for 6 months now?
Yeah, 6 months, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like, I mean, you're no veteran, but that's a decent amount of time to have, consistent content coming out, showing up for your audience every single fortnight. But in between that, obviously, we both know the prep and all the things that go on.
Yeah.
What do you think your favourite part's been?
My favourite part is the day that we record.
Yeah. On track studio vibes.
That's Christmas Day. That's when I get out of bed knowing that I've got to record that day, it's the best. I love the prep. I really do. I love the way I do my questions and the way I prep, a little behind the scenes.
BTS.
Is that I try to ask the questions that tell a story. And going back to the art thing, I think I'm a storyteller. That's what I love to do. And that's how I sort of stage the questions. And I love talking to family members of the guests and talking to friends and just trying to get a better idea of how to tell this story as best as we can for the person and then secondly for the audience, but for that person, for the guest that's coming in. That's great. I love doing all that homework. But my favorite part is coming into the studio, seeing you guys and shooting with the guests. Yeah,
that's our favorite part of the week too. Yeah, I love that. I think that the way you do your episodes is unique, and this is something I always talk about with my, in particular, coaching clients about their podcast, is that, you know, you listen to other content creators and all the things, but having that unique pathway to how you actually do your own episode is going to be what sets you apart, and it's going to be what makes you enjoy the entirety of the process, not just the part that's, you know, the social media snippet going live and like the likes and all the things. So I think that's why if from my, you know, expert opinion or from the outsider's lens, I can see it makes sense that why you're riding the wave of success. So far, so good. Who knows what's going to happen? You might crash and burn, and I'll have nothing to do with you at that point. No, I'm kidding. But I think it's just, yeah, you should definitely give yourself a lot of credit. And like even everyone who I run into, they'll be like, "How's the studio going? Oh, I saw that podcast. That guy Elliott, his podcast is so good." And rah rah rah. And I'm like, yes, it is. Yeah. It is. So I'm very proud of you, and it's very exciting to see everything that you're creating with the podcast and the community that you're building.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. For those who haven't listened to Elliott's podcast at this point, obviously that's your next step, but he has a closing tradition on his podcast that he gets a friend or family member of the guest to ask a question. And yeah, I'm surprised attacking him with a call from one of his best mates. So we're hearing that live, and hopefully it all goes well. Time will tell. Chris, you up? ? Chris, are you up? Update, Chris is in fact not up.
Yeah, Chris.
And nor is Brock.
Nor is Brock.
And nor is Leffers. Wait, we didn't try Leffers. We went to our true friend, Dad. Well, we're going to him now. We're going to be dialing effective immediately. Hopefully Dad is going to pull through. Hi, Dad.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're on the air. A surprise attack. How are you?
Listen, I'm still living the dream.
That's good. That's good.
But the trouble is, it's not my dream. It's someone else's.
Oh, that is the trouble. We've got to sort that out by the time of your next appearance on Mind Your Head podcast.
I know. I agree. So,
look, I'll give you a little bit of context to my call.
Sure.
It's the fact that I've actually got Elliott on my podcast now, and you know his little closing tradition that he does on his podcast, getting...
I sure do.
Yes, you do. I'd like to just return the favour for the man himself, and ask you to ask your question to Elliott and make him answer on the spot. I haven't given you much time to prep for your question, so...
All right. It'll be a parent type sort of question about his mental and physical health. So I'll ask that question. Do you want me to ask it now, or when do you want me to do it?
Yeah, go for it now.
Okay, so my question to Al would be, listen, we're proud the fact that he's looked at ways of better improving his health and physical well-being, but from a parent point of view, that's a short-term goal that he's hit. We would like to know what sort of planning he's done, more of a mid-term and a long-term goal. Where does he see himself in 10 or 15 years, sort of mentally and physically? Does he have those goals in his mind as well?
Good question, Dad.
Good question, Dad. Thanks to you for that one. Yeah, long-term... You say long-term physical goals and mental goals?
Oh, and mental, both. It's physical is probably easier to fix than mental. We want to, you're doing some great stuff now, but we want to know what have you got in place that this continues in your mental health and as well as your physical health, but where you're going to be in, mid, 5, 10 years time and also longer than that.
Yeah, I think I've got some really good habits in place at the moment now and a really good routine that is benefiting my mental health. I think this podcast was a huge thing for selfishly, I'm looking at it, it was a huge thing for my own mental health. I want to keep continuing this and growing this as much as I can. I think the feedback that I've received from the podcast, from people that has said that it's changed their life, or if it's helped them reconnect with their parents. And I think the feedback that I've received from it it's almost given me a responsibility to the listeners that what I'm doing is good, and I'll keep going with it. I think the things that I'm doing throughout my day and continuing looking out for my own mental health, I think just being more aware of it is my long-term goal. I think just to keep growing on what I'm already keep doing. Yeah.
And that's perfect. I mean, that's what that's what goals we set. Once we start forming good habits, we want to make sure we continue, because it's so hard to start again. So you've got those good habits starting to be formed, and it'll be nice to think that in 5, 10, 15 years' time, you're still doing the same things. And I'm doing that as well, actually. I'm starting to develop a few of those habits as well. Your podcast was certainly was a recheck, a reset for me, and I'm starting to develop some good thoughts for my next 40 years.
So good. It's the ripple effect of his podcast has affected you and so many others. So.
Oh, and that's it. And it certainly has. I've sat down and I've thought long and hard about where I want to be and what I want to do. And I'm not ending my good years aren't behind me. My good years are in front of me. I might only have 20 or 30 left, but
no, aim for 40.
I'm sit. Yeah. Oh, wow, shit, that would be ugly. That would be messy. I might need Elliott to come and look after me.
Well, you've got a new hip and you've got a couple of new knees, so you should be good to go.
Listen, I know, I'm rocking. I mean, I'm going to have it. By the time 30 or 40 are up, they'll be doing brains and heart. Oh, they're doing hearts now. They'll be doing brains. I wouldn't want a new one of them.
Yeah. No. But yeah, go back to your question. I think I feel better. I feel better mentally and physically now than I did in my 20s. So I think that whole 20s was a bit of a learning curve for me in so many ways, that I feel like now I'm living a life that I want to live.
And that's good, because sometimes we don't do that until we get to 50 or 60, and our long-term partner has got to go through it. You're learning that, or done that at 20, couple of years into 30. So you're now hopefully going to be set up for, the next 50, and you've got a lady to live with, and you'll have a family, and you'll be in a better space than a lot of people are. They don't learn these skills or have these thoughts until, it's probably too old and I want a divorce hits the table. So that's good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm proud.
Oh.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks for taking the call. None of his other mates did. So,
mate, I'm on.
One.
I mean, you were our first option too.
Oh, yeah, that too. No, it was always going to be cool.
Sure. Okay. All right. You have a nice day. Right. I'll go back.
Yes,
Thank
as
you.
you were. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.
Beautiful response from Dad. And I actually couldn't agree more. I really feel like mental health is all about what you do every day, not what you do that one time. Do you know what I mean?
It's being consistent with it.
Yeah.
I think for the very first time that I'm putting my health number one. I'd never thought about my health being number one. Mental health, physical health, it was always probably 5th or 6th down the line.
Yeah.
Like friends, family, partying, rugby. That was pretty much all ahead of it.
Yeah.
And what I learnt through my journey is that if one of those things, you can still continue on.
Yeah.
But if your health fails, everything else does.
Yeah.
I've now shifted everything that my health is number one over my house, my girlfriend, my dog, my family members, my friends.
Your podcast.
My podcast. Like, I can't be the best host and the best person to do this if my health isn't there. I can't be the best friend, the best boyfriend. I can't be anything like that, the best version of myself, if my health isn't number one. Orientate my life and my choices and my habits and my routine about my health, my physical health. What am I eating? How am I sleeping? What people am I spending my time with? What excites me? What I'm passionate about? But also, I think what I've realized is that we can't always surround ourselves with joy and happiness. I think what I've learnt, that I've got to experience some pain, and that goes back to the run I did on Sunday, was that I've got to put myself through a bit of hardship. I've got to put myself through some uncomfortable situations, and I've got to be comfortable with those uncomfortable situations. And they don't have to be anything drastic, even just...
Says the man who ran 70 Ks yesterday or whenever it was. This run he did, let's just clarify. It was 70 Ks, right?
Yeah, it was from my house in Maroochydore up to Noosa and back.
But nothing drastic.
It's funny because like I do a lot of like saunas and ice baths, and there's so much physical benefits to that. I understand there's some science behind that. But the number one reason I do it is because it's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's the number one reason I do it, is trying to train my brain, because I used to be so reactive to situations, and my patience in situations and people, patience in general used to be really, really bad. So when I get in those uncomfortable situations, I just try to like concentrate on one thing, concentrate on my breathing, and just try to relax and stay calm. And the more I've done that, it's funny how the more you do those little things will help you in situations in life. Like even just when you get bad news, or even if you're in traffic and someone cuts you off, like little things like that, you can just let it go.
Yeah.
And I used to hold on to those things. And what I've learned is just put yourself in uncomfortable situations as much as you can, and that will just train your brain at becoming better. And that run on so many different levels was what I needed. Like people were saying, that's going to be a physical thing, and it was a physical thing. But I'll be honest with you, that was 90% mental, 10% physical. Like there's a lot of like inner demons really were coming up. Like a lot of things that I haunted myself with throughout my life, not being good enough, being a quitter. I reckon when I was a kid growing up, and even in my 20s, I quit a lot. I would run from any sort of pain or uncomfortable situations. I would always run. I'd always take the shortcut. I would always take the easy road.
What toll do you think that took on you, like down the track, always taking the shortcut?
Honestly, I thought I was a bit of a coward. I didn't think I was a man. I didn't think that I stood for anything. I didn't think I had any integrity. I thought I wasn't living a life that I knew I could. I think I held myself back from reaching my full potential. I think I showed that in rugby. I think the easiest thing for me to say that the reason I didn't kick on and go further, what used to help me sleep at night was saying you weren't good enough. Heaps of people don't make it. It's right, you just weren't good enough. I told myself that, thinking it would just help me sleep at night.
Wow.
When really, the more I've thought about it, I was good enough. I just held myself back. And now being comfortable with knowing that, listen, you were good enough. It's just you were holding yourself back from your real potential. And I look back on those things, and I used to get really down looking back on those things and knowing what I could have done, but now I use it as fuel. So instead of going, look what I could have done, I now go, all right, that's something not to do. In situations like even starting the podcast, I was so like, no, I'll never be good at it. So I just never tried. So the fear of like failure would stop me from trying things. So I went through so much years of my life not trying anything because I never wanted to be bad at it. And you're bad at 9 times out of 10 when you start something new, you're going to be shit at it. And I just never wanted that. I always wanted to be good. And the fear of not being good would stop me from trying new things. It got to a point where that you've got to make a decision on how you want to live your life and how you want to look back at your life. I look back at my 20s, I had a lot of fun and I met a lot of good people, and I travelled around the world playing rugby. But there's also a side of me that I look back and go, fuck, like you took the shortcut so much. I made a promise to myself now that I started this journey really when I was 30, and when I'm 40, I want to look back at those 10 years and go, fuck, you gave it everything. You tried it. You didn't care about looking like a fool. You didn't care about, you've never done a podcast before, and you didn't care what people thought. You just wanted to do what you love. You've never run 5Ks in your life, but you went out and did 70Ks one morning just because you wanted to do it. And I want future Elliott to look back on past Elliott and go, yeah, I'm proud of what you've done.
Proud of the choices you made.
Yeah.
Amazing. In terms of the people who can relate to what you're saying, and like I hear you, Elliott, but I don't want to fail, and it's easy for you because, you know, you've clearly got people who love you anyway. And genuinely, they just want to set themselves up for success to start, let's say, a podcast, but the listener listening, apply it to whatever you want to do to put yourself out of your comfort zone. What advice would you give them to set them up for success, like genuine, actual success? Look back on the last 6 months. What did you actually tangibly put in place to reach where you've got?
I wrote down goals that I wanted to do short term. 12 months. I often get ahead of myself and what I want to do in 5-10 years. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no. What do I want to do in 12 months? What do I want to do this year? I just wrote down, I would love to start a podcast. All right, cool. What are we going to talk about? And then I was on, it's hard to like give advice because what motivated me, and I think I've talked to you about that, is like I was on the fence. I was like, oh, I really want to do it. But what pushed me over the edge was, and it's what sort of pushed me over the edge to do the run, was people telling me I can't do something. Mm-hmm. That's what motivated me. It's hard to give advice of other people, but what motivated me to originally start it was someone said to me, someone who's a friend, and I won't say their name because they're actually one of my biggest supporters now on the podcast, but they said to me, we went out for dinner and drinks, and I voiced my opinion that I would love to start a podcast, and a couple of people laughed and said, what would you talk about rugby, in a like sarcastic sort of way, as if I couldn't start a podcast. And that was what got me over the line, really, because I hate it when people tell me I can't do something.
Yeah. And
all the other all the stuff that I wrote down was just like little building blocks. And then I needed that push off the blocks. I just needed that push into the deep end. And when they said that and sort of sneaky, because when I was playing footy, one of my triggers was everyone thinking that I had nothing else to offer but rugby. While I was playing, I didn't want to talk about rugby because I felt like all I did was rugby. So it'd be nice just to go out and just have conversations about anything else. And people would make sly remarks saying, oh, you wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for rugby. And that really ate at me because from as long as I can remember, I always knew I had more to offer than rugby. Mm. And when people said I couldn't do anything else apart from rugby, it was just like a fire lit in me that I can do anything I wanted to do. And again, there were these self-doubts like, maybe you can't do this. Maybe you can't start a podcast, or maybe I can't. And then I was just like, you know what? It got a time where I was just like, no, I can do this and I will do this. And it's almost like, am I doing this to prove that person wrong? Or am I doing this to prove myself right that I can do this?
Either which way.
It's
you working.
wanted to. Yeah. And that was a huge thing for me, was just like, I think all of us that we all have these grand ideas that we want to do things, and it's the execution that we're lacking.
Yeah.
And each of us have our own motivation that we need to get across the line. And my motivation might be different to someone else's, but my motivation was someone telling me I couldn't do something. Someone else putting limits on what I can achieve in my life.
Yeah.
And there were some inner demons that I was putting limits on my own life too. Mm. And I just never wanted to go through my life and have all these fears and limitations of what I can achieve.
Yeah.
My huge thing was living with regret.
Yeah.
I never wanted to get to my dad's age and look back on my life and go, oh, I wish I did that. Why didn't I do it? Or I was scared that people might judge me differently.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge motivator for me, is not living with any regret. And the reason that is because I look back in my 20s and I regret a lot of the choices that I made. But at the same time, they've built the person I am today. So I'm just trying to build on that and look back and go, all right, live with no regret. Who cares if people judge you or look at you differently? And I think I'm getting older and I'm caring less of what people think.
Yeah.
And maybe maybe just trying to ignore when people say I can't do something because they might get me to do something I don't want to do just so I can prove them what's next. But yeah, even doing that run on Sunday, someone mentioned that I probably couldn't run 2Ks. And I was like, oh, you know what? I'll show you.
So funny. So relatable. I'm a bit similar, I think. I think it's about whatever, like you said, whatever motivates you, like lean into that motivation. And then, like you said, it's the execution that really trips people up. So putting things in place that actually assist you to execute on whatever it is you want to do. Amazing. Elliott, thank you for coming on. You're a hero to many. And I know that so many people are going to get a lot out of this episode, if not from your story of like what you faced mentally and physically with the run, but also mentally with your journey there, but also like pursuing the podcast is so much credit to you. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're
been
welcome.
a blast.
Any final words?
Any final words? I think I do want to reiterate that for everyone listening, I think it's really important that we put our health first.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge thing that I've learned over my 20s is that whatever's going on in your life, you're not going to serve others or you're not going to be the best version of yourself unless you put your health first. Mental health, physical health. That's got to be everyone's priority. If everyone's priority is their own health, then we should be in a good space.
Couldn't agree more. Full stop.
Awesome. Thanks, Soph.
Thank you.